Strait of Hormuz has continued to be a conflict. Up to now, Iran and the US have not been able to come together and fix the conflict that's affecting the Strait of Hormuz. As the conflict continues to increase, routing in supply chain has remained and has become a necessary alternative. We've seen shipments that has usually take a single or direct route from Asia to Europe are now stopping in different countries. It's not because they are cheaper or faster, it's because they are safer. Why? Because companies and operators are no longer optimizing for speed and costs. They're not optimizing for politics. And that shift is affecting how the flow of supply chain in the world is going currently. This is Tales of Logistics. Here, we don't just talk about the actions that are causing supply chain. We talk about the decisions behind why those actions take place. So taking you back to what I was discussing about, the Strait of Hormuz, like I mentioned in my last episode, is a crucial choke point in supply chain. About 20% of the flow of fuel transportation occurs through that strait. And because of the conflict in the Middle East, we have continued to see increase in fuel prices and oil prices. And companies are now thinking, what else do we do? How do we navigate the situation we have currently? And they are now rerouting via shipments. Routing used to be very easy. Routing used to be simple. You get your goods, you know your direction, you know the ETA or the ETD of the shipment to arrive, and then you carry on with the transportation. Well, it is no longer the same because of the conflicts, geopolitical conflicts. Alternative routing of shipments has now become a necessity. Direct shipments are now taking indirect path. Goods are being routed through additional countries, and new hubs are appearing in places that were not previously central. Now, these new hubs are not in locations that are geographically central. These new hubs are politically and operationally central. Now, we have hubs in Southeast Asia. We have hubs in North Africa. We have these hubs in Europe. And so if you're an operations personnel who want to explore these alternative routes, you have to consider a lot of factors, because to start with, the time of transit is no longer going to be what you had projected it to be. Say the shipment is coming from Asia to Europe on a direct route, or say it is going through the Strait of Hormuz. If it's supposed to be 45 days, it is no longer going to be 45 days. It's going to be longer than 45 days. So operators have to put into consideration transit time. You have to put into consideration new compliance checks, new documentation requirements. All of these will be required if that operations team decides to explore alternative routes in their shipments. At first glance, it looks like rerouting through alternative hubs is inefficient or it's just random. No. It is a deliberate decision. Why? Because companies used to optimize for cost, speed, and efficiency. But now companies are optimizing for a new variable that has come into the equation. This new variable is risk, political risk. Political tensions is on the increase. And so companies are making certain decisions. Why? Because geopolitical tension makes certain straits less predictable or become more restrictive, like we see in the case of Strait of Hormuz. At first, it was predictable that this Strait of Hormuz would either be blocked or restricted. And in some situations, political tensions in the region make certain routes a bit more sensitive. And that's why we see countries are now thinking about, how about we use our port as a neutral hub, a hub that is not tied to any political alignment, a hub that is completely neutral operationally and politically. That way, these shipments, these clients that used to ship goods from, say, point A to point B, if there is a political tension between the point A and point B, they can think about coming to our hub as a point C, point D, point E. So it becomes a safer port or a safer route for companies to take. But taking that route comes with its own consequences. It comes with its own actions. And at the end of the day, it is the customers or the customers themselves at home that bears the brunt. What we see now with the consistent increase in fuel prices, because shipments are taking alternative routes, fuel costs will continue to increase. Why? First of all, taking alternative routes adds extra miles to the shipment. So if it's supposed to be a 45-day transit time, if you add, say, 30 days to it, it becomes a 75 days transit time. And that's fuel. That's time. That's cost. Now, if the transit is going to involve 2 or more neutral hubs, that's 2 or more customs to deal with, different documentation requirements, different checks requirements, different clearance requirements. All of these add potential delays to the shipment. Not to talk about labor, because as the transit continues, this is going to be overhead cost on the labor. And so the operational cost would increase. So yes, it is true that it is safer. It is true that you have lesser risk. Your shipment has a lesser chance of being destroyed or seized if you take alternative routes, but it is more expensive, and that expense comes down to the customer who goes onto the gas stations to get fuel. So what is it showing to us? That geopolitical tension has a huge impact on the global supply chain. Before now, companies only optimize for cost and speed, which is very important, which has always been very important. But we've noticed in the past 5 years, there have been supply chain disruptions, mainly with straits and routes. And now companies are thinking that, are we going to optimize for speed, for costs, or for risk? Can we optimize all three? What is the cost implication of optimizing all three? Who's going to bear the brunt of optimizing all three? And risk right now in terms of political situations has now becoming a factor. Because even if you have agreed upon a deal saying that your shipment is going to cost you XYZ amount of dollars to ship it from Asia to Europe, there is no certainty that during transit, a political eruption, a political conflict is not going to arise. That becomes new fear. At what point during transit will a political conflict arise that would affect my shipment? And by affecting my shipment, I will not only be the one to suffer from it, because I also have to transfer the cost to the bottom line. And who are the bottom lines? It is the clients. It is the customers themselves. So it is difficult to optimize for all three. It's difficult to optimize for cost, speed, and stability. It is difficult because you have to choose. Are you optimizing for speed and cost, or are you optimizing for stability? Do you try to find your way to go past the Strait of Hormuz, or do you just take a chance and go through alternative routes? If you find your way to go through the Strait of Hormuz, which is speed and cost, how are you sure you're going to get your shipments? If you go through alternative routes, which is stability, how do you control the costs, which has also affected the speed? Because if you have told your client an ETA and the shipment does not come within that ETA, your customer, on the other hand, has a deal waiting for him to conclude and has been waiting for his shipment. So there is no better option. There is no better option to how to manage a blocked choke point. So how to manage a blocked choke point that's huge at the Strait of Hormuz. Because at the end of the day, what are you trying to stay in the same straits and just wiggle your way out, or you taking alternative routes? The customers are the ones suffering from it. Why? Because supply chain is now a global system. It is now a global network. What happens to one part of supply chain affects every supply chain. So what are companies doing? How do you manage it? Well, like I mentioned in the last episode, communication is important. Letting your clients know that there is a possibility, there's a potential increase in cost, a potential delay, and a potential increase in the ETD, which is the estimated time of delivery. It's important. So they need to be carried along. They need to know that what is happening is going to affect the time they get their shipment. One, they need to also know that there's a possibility. Again, it depends on what you have in the contract. So if there's a clause in the contract that allows for the possibility of increasing the costs of a shipment, if anything beyond your control occurs, then you can talk about that. There is also the insurance coverage, which is also going to go up. So these factors need to be communicated to your customers. It is not your fault that there are political situations in a particular choke point. But if that choke point continues, and you know that what you have as a priority is sustainability, then it's important to look for alternative routes. Alternative routes are now sprouting up globally. You have Asia, you have Europe, and you have North Africa. So you can decide to explore them. Yes, it means more documentation. It means more paperwork. It means more checkpoints. It means potential delay, but you can still have customers. You can still deliver your goods than sticking it out in the Strait of Hormuz, which currently is blocked, and you do not know when it's going to be freed up. From what we saw in the news, the negotiation and discussions between the US and Iran was a dead end. So nothing occurred, which means the blockage will continue, and the prices of fuel will continue to go up, and the price of commodities or the cost of living will continue to go up. So as operators, we need to now be prepared for a third factor. Initially, we used to be prepared for speed and for cost. Now we have to be prepared for risk. Mainly if you're doing international trade, it's a very huge factor in international trade. Operators are now concerned as to when will a political tension affect our transport. What used to be a routing decision is now a risk management decision. Because today's world, every route is no longer equal, and not every port serves the same purpose as it used to be. Now, we have to figure what port should we use if something happens to our shipment from point A to point B. By knowing that we are always prepared to navigate to situations that are beyond our control. That is how we wrap up our episode this week on Tales of Logistics, and see you in our next episode. Voila.